Hello, this is Adam, and this is another of my ranking of Agatha Christie's top 15 novels. And today we're up to number 12. And so if we just review the other videos we've had, so at number 15, going back a little bit, number 15, we had The Seven Dials Mystery, which was a standalone with the main detective being Superintendent Battle and Eileen Bundle Brent. At number 14, we had Crooked House, which is another standalone. Number 13, we had The Body in the Library, which was a Miss Marple. So today we're up to number 12, and today's 12th best Agatha Christie novel or short story is The Witness for the Prosecution and Other Stories, which is a collection of 11 of Agatha Christie's short stories. Now, this takes a little bit of explaining to understand the situation on this one. So, the Agatha Christie books were not always the same in Great Britain and in the United States. In fact, oftentimes they had different titles depending on whether you were buying it in Great Britain or whether you were buying it in the United States. So this is a short story collection that does not appear in the UK. This came out in 1948, but it never was released in the United Kingdom. And the reason for that is because these stories had already been released in the United Kingdom under a different collection of short stories. In the United Kingdom, the short story collections were either called The Hound of Death, or they were called the Listerdale Mysteries. And also, I guess, a couple of them were The Problem at Peninsula Bay and Other Stories. So since, for whatever reason, the publishers in the United States and the publishers in the United Kingdom didn't release the same Agatha Christie novels all the time, this is a unique short story collection only for U.S. readers. The Witness for the Prosecution and Other Stories. Most of these stories, as you go through, you find out that most of these stories were written in the 1920s. And because they weren't released in the United States under any edition, but the United States wanted the publishers in the United States wanted to profit from Agatha Christie being such a successful writer, they collected these stories together and they put them in a short story collection. Now, Agatha Christie has many short story collections. I'm not sure exactly the number, but probably around 15 or so short story collections that she had during her career. And of all the ones that I've read so far, there are some that were published later in her writing career that I haven't gotten around to. But of the ones that she has written so far, or that I've read so far, I should say, these are the ones that these sort of short story collections is my favorite. So in this, The Witness for the Prosecution and Other Stories, there are 11 short stories. Now, so let's talk a little bit about Agatha Christie, her novels versus her short stories. I prefer the novels. And just as kind of a little bit of a spoiler, since this is my favorite one, I guess it's not too much of a spoiler, but this is the only time that you're going to have a short story collection appear on this ranking of 15 videos. I prefer the novels quite a bit because they're just the mystery is more it's more drawn out, it's more complicated. You can introduce more characters. You can have much greater character development in a full-length novel. Of course, none of her novels are very long. I think maybe her longest one might be just a shade over 300 pages. So none of them are very long. But I just really prefer the novels to the short stories. The short stories are fun, and the thing I like best about, and I'm going to talk about this in just a second when we get into the short stories themselves. She comes up with some really clever ideas. I like the ideas that she has. I like just how inventive she is, in coming up with new ideas. I mean, for somebody who had such a long writing career and published so much mystery work, just the fact that she kept consistently coming up with new ideas and new ways to have people die, and new solutions, and they always seem fresh. And that's one of the things I really like about Agatha Christie. She's able to, for the most part, there are a couple of exceptions, but for the most part, she doesn't recycle her ideas and use them over and over again. She comes up with new and creative ideas, and the short stories. One of the reasons I like this short story collection the best is there's just the ideas they seem kind of interesting and clever, and it's just a fun read. So these stories are really, really fun to read. Okay, so again, like I mentioned before, there's 11 short stories in this book. So most of them are around between 15 to 25 pages. And so you can read a short. That's the great thing about this. You can read these short stories. You can read one a day if you want to, and kind of savor them over a couple of weeks, or you can read half the book in one sitting and the other half in another sitting, and you're just constantly entertained by these short stories. Now, the thing about a short story collection, of course, like anything else, is some are going to be better than the others. And so, did I love all 11 of these short stories in here? No, I did not. But and when I went through and when I read these, I made little notes, so then that way I could remember how many of these that I had really, really enjoyed. And of the 11, I chose that 6 of the 11 were very good, and they were stories that were memorable, and I really enjoyed them. So there was 5 that were either so-so or kind of just missed with me. And then so in today's video, I'm going to talk about 3 of the short stories specifically, just to, so I don't want to make the video too long. So this is not a collection that has a famous detective in it. So there's no Miss Marple stories in this, and there is one Hercule Poirot story. It's the very last one. It's called The Second Gong, and it's actually not that great of a story, I didn't think. And so the stories that I'm going to talk about all are stories that do not have one of her famous detectives in them. So there's no Tommy and Tuppence in this either. There's no Superintendent Battle. There's no Bundle Brent in any of these stories. These are just standalone detective stories. So the most famous story in this collection, of course, is the first one. The Witness for the Prosecution is the most famous story of this one. And of course, it was made into a very, very famous movie. If you're a little bit older, you may remember in 1957, there was a movie that came out where Charles Laughton played the lawyer and Marlene Dietrich played Romaine Vole, who I'll talk about a little bit more in just a minute. And it was directed by Billy Wilder. It's an old black and white, and it's considered to be one of the great movies of the 50s, and maybe one of the most memorable of all Agatha Christie movies. So that movie and a lot of the other movies about the Witness for the Prosecution, the BBC did just a couple of years ago, just did a new version of the Witness for the Prosecution that had Kim Cattrall, I think, as playing Emily French, the murder victim. And I'll get to that in just a minute. But the movie versions that have come out of the Witness for the Prosecution are actually based on a play, The Witness for the Prosecution, that Agatha Christie rewrote in the 1950s. The play was, of course, the short story was the kernel for the play, but in the play there's more characters, and it's a little bit more drawn out. It's a longer, more in-depth story. Whereas if you're reading the short story, The Witness for the Prosecution, for the first time, you might be surprised that it's so brief. So I think it's less than 30 pages, depending on the edition you buy, of course. And so The Witness for the Prosecution is very famous, and you might be surprised how brief the story is. So let's talk about what the story is. It's a pretty simple story. So there's a character named Leonard Vole, who's in his early 30s. He's a very handsome man. He doesn't have a job, and so he's kind of searching around, and he's kind of trying to find, how he can make income for himself and for his wife, whose name is Romaine Vole. We'll get to her in a second because she's. We need to introduce Emily French. So Emily French is an older lady who is very, very wealthy, but apparently she doesn't. There's a comment that Leonard makes in the story that she doesn't appear like she's wealthy. Leonard says this to one of his friends when he's first being introduced to Emily, is that she doesn't appear as though she would be wealthy, but she is. She's very wealthy. She lives by herself. She has some cats, and she has a maid, but pretty much, she's lonely. And so she finds Leonard to be a companion. So they meet at a party, and then introductions are made. Emily takes a liking to this young man. He's very handsome. He seems suave. And so we find out later on when Mr. Mayhern, who is the lawyer who is the defense lawyer for Leonard after he's been accused of murdering Emily French, we find out that Leonard, the reason that he kind of enjoyed spending time with Emily, as he says, is that his mom died very young, and he lived with his aunt, and he was raised by his aunt, but then his aunt died when he was about 12. And so he's just always kind of enjoyed having a nurturing person, an older lady who would be a little bit kind of a mother figure and kind of give him some nurturing and understanding, because he didn't have much of that when he was growing up. So anyways, Emily French is murdered and Leonard is the prime suspect. And it just turns out that in her will, Emily left her money to Leonard Vole. Again, so she didn't have any relations, so she leaves her money to Leonard. And Leonard knows this, that this is the situation, because he's been asked by Emily to help her manage her finances. Now, the maid at the French household, the maid's name is Janet Mackenzie. Janet Mackenzie has a strong dislike for Leonard Vole. She sees him as being somebody who's just after money, and that he only cared for Emily because of the fact that he was trying to get her money. So he sees Leonard as kind of a gold digger. And so Mr. Mayhern is trying to understand the case as much as he can, because he wants to protect Leonard, of course. And so then the whole situation about the wife comes in, where the wife is Leonard's alibi. Leonard said after he was with Emily that night when she was murdered, but he left her home before she was murdered. And Leonard says that it must have just been a burglar who broke in and was trying to steal things and then killed Emily because she confronted him. And so Leonard's alibi for where he was at the time of the murder is his wife. He says he went home and he was with his wife. Now, it's interesting, later in the story, Mr. Mayhern goes to interview Romaine Vole, and he finds out from her that no, Leonard was not there when he said he was. And so through some discussion, Mr. Mayhern, the lawyer, finds out that Romaine is not happily married to Leonard Vole. In fact, Romaine, she comes right out and she says that she hates him. She hates her husband, and that she's going to testify against her husband. Hence, the titular, she becomes the witness for the prosecution. And so she testifies, in fact, that she saw, that Leonard was not there when he said he was, and that she suspects that he was indeed the murderer. So now I'm not going to spoil the ending for you, because the ending is fantastic. That's the setup for the witness for the prosecution. Like I said, it's by far the most well-known short story in this collection. It's a very good story. The next story I want to talk about is a story called SOS. And again, these stories were written in the 1920s. The collection was gathered together and published in 1948. But at the introduction to each of the stories, it lets you know when Agatha Christie wrote this story. And a lot of times they appeared in a magazine first before they were published into a collection, whether it was in the United Kingdom or the United States later on. So there's a story called SOS, which I enjoyed. And so in this story, we meet the Dinsmead family, and they live in rural England, very far away from other places. And in the story, it comes out that the next nearest inhabitable home is at least 3 miles away from where they live, and the next village is at least 11 miles away. And so they're isolated. So the Dinsmead family has moved out into this isolated location. And besides Mr. Dinsmead and his wife, Mrs. Dinsmead, who don't actually get along that well in the story, Mrs. Dinsmead always seems to be kind of afraid of her husband. They have 3 children. So the 2 daughters are named Charlotte and Magdalene, and Johnny is the son. Now, what happens is, it's one night they're sitting down to eat, to have the family dinner, and the weather outside is horrible. So typical English rain, huge thunderstorm, the wind is blowing really, really severely, and there's a knock on the door. And Mr. Dinsmead goes to open the door, and he finds out it's a man whose name is Mortimer Cleveland. And he's been driving his car, and he decided to take a shortcut to get home quicker through the countryside. And his car, both of his tires on his car, two of the tires on his car have been punctured, and so his car is useless. And so he saw the light on the hill, and he decided to hike over, and he is now at the home of the Dinsmeads, and he's hoping to get shelter for the night. Now, this seems a little bit maybe cliche, and here comes another little bit of a cliche part. The 2 daughters, Magdalene and Charlotte, are described as being very, very beautiful. And so we have 2 daughters who are in their 20s, and Mortimer Cleveland notices that the daughters look quite different. One is a redhead, one is a brunette, but they're both very, very, very beautiful. So Mortimer Cleveland is able to have the Dinsmeads take him in that night, and he's going to stay with them and go home, get his car repaired, and go home the next day. And so the two girls are showing him, after they've had dinner, the two girls are showing him up to the room where he's going to be staying for the night. And as they're getting the room prepared, they leave him there, and he notices that while the girls were in there preparing the room, in kind of a dusty part of the room on a table, one of the two girls wrote in letters the letters SOS, and so obviously a call of distress. And so Mortimer Cleveland. Oh, and one thing I should say too is he's not just a typical traveler. He is a person who is studied kind of paranormal things. He is an expert on what's called the mental sciences, and he's written books about it. And he traveled around the country, and he gives lectures about kind of paranormal things and mental sciences and just psychic things. And so he's kind of in tune with these kind of things, these paranormal activities. And he just kind of senses that when he arrived at the house that something was amiss at the house, something was wrong at the house. And so now he knows for sure that somebody is in distress. And so his first thought is that Mr. Dinsmead seems a little bit maybe aggressive, or he doesn't want his daughters to be overly friendly with this strange man. And then the son, Johnny, appears to be a little bit slow in his mental processes, but he enjoys experimenting with things and using chemicals to conduct experiments. And again, I'm not going to tell too much of the story there, so I'll give you a little bit of taste, and hopefully it'll make you want to go read that story a little bit further. And the last story that I want to talk about in the collection is a story called Philomel Cottage. This story was written in 1924. So, and again, I'm choosing three of the stories that I think are the most interesting in the book. There's a lady named Alex Martin, and she works in a business office in London. And Alex is, she's just been working there for a long time. And one of her coworkers is a man named Dick Windyford, and they've kind of developed a romance through the many years that they've worked at this business together. And Dick really likes her, but he's been saving up his money, and he has to support his younger brother, who they don't have any parents, and so he's been using his income from his office work to send his younger brother to school. What that means is Dick doesn't have enough money to support himself and Alex should they get married, so he is put off proposing to Alex. But it's always kind of been that idea that one of these days we will get married and we will be husband and wife. But Dick has never gotten around to it, and it's been many, many years. And Alex goes to a party, and she meets this man named Gerald Martin, who is just fantastically good looking and sweeps Alex off of her feet. And even though they only know each other less than a week, Gerald proposes to Alex, and Alex accepts, and they get married. Alex feels bad for Dick, and when she breaks the news to Dick, Dick is like, "Whoa, wait! I can't believe this. What are you doing?" And she's like, "Well, you had your chances, and you just never took the chances. And so I'm in love with Gerald, and I'm going to marry him." And she's like, "Well, how well do you know this man? You've hardly just met him. How well? You can't marry somebody you just hardly met." And Alex is like, "Well, I did." And so they move out to the countryside. They buy a home out in the countryside, and most of the money for the home comes from Alex's money. That's an important point of the story. Alex has saved up her money from her office work, and she invests most of it in buying the new home for her and Gerald. Not too long after moving in, everything's going well, and they're happily married. But not too long after they moved in, Alex is bothered by this recurrent dream that she's having. In her dream, she's dreaming that her husband Gerald is being murdered, and the person who's murdering him is her old boyfriend Dick. And right before she wakes up from this dream or this nightmare, she, in each of the 3 times that she has this dream, she's encouraging and she encourages Dick that what he's doing is right. She was really supportive of and really glad that they got Gerald out of the way. And then she's kind of cozying up to Dick Windiford, and she's saying, well, now that he's gone, now that Gerald's gone, we can get on with our life together. And so she has that same dream three times, and it really bothers her. She wakes up and she's really bothered by this because she loves Gerald, and so she chose Gerald over Dick, and so she's confused by why she's having these dreams. And then, not too much longer after that, she gets a call from Dick, kind of out of the blue, and says, "Well, I'm in the neighborhood, and I just thought I would come by and have dinner with you and your husband, of course, and just to see how things are going." And Alex is like, "No, you can't do that. You can't do that." And so her mental state has been really thrown off by these dreams or these nightmares and the fact that Dick's in the neighborhood and that he asked to come by and see them. And so it gets Alex to thinking, how well do I know Gerald, my husband? One day she's going through some American newspapers, and she happens to read about this murder case about this man named Charles LeMaitre, who has gotten away with murder. Apparently, he was accused of murdering a couple of his former wives, and he got away both times. He was not indicted for the murder, and he also and there's a picture of him in the paper, and Alex notices that Charles LeMaitre looks a lot like her husband, Gerald Martin. So now she's like, could it be that this man who I don't know that much and I've married is actually a serial killer? Dun dun dun. Okay, so, and again, I'm not going to spoil the ending for that. So those are 3 of the stories that appear in the Witness for the Prosecution and other stories. Again, there's 11 short stories. Most of them are very good. Some of the other ones that I liked, just so you know, in the collection that I didn't have time to talk about in this video, some of the other ones that I liked were The Fourth Man. That one was really clever. The Mystery of the Blue Jar is very good. And Mr. Eastwood's Adventure is really fun. So I would encourage you to read this one if you have not. Stick with my other videos. As you're seeing, I'm counting down the 15, my favorite 15 Agatha Christie novels. Give me a comment, ask me a question in the feedback. If you like this video, please like the video, subscribe to my channel, and we'll talk soon about what my 11th favorite Agatha Christie novel or short story is. Hope you're having a great day. Talk to you soon. Bye.